Welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. Today we're talking about our 2024 preseason WNBA Draft Big Board, released at the Next, including breakdowns into over 30 prospects in this year's class. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Welcome. You are Locked On Women's Basketball. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. My name is Hunter Cruse. I'm your Saturday host, covering the WNBA draft and prospect scouting. I'm joined by my co-hosts M. Adler and Lincoln Shafer. M covers the WNBA with a focus on player development and the game within the game. Lincoln is our biomechanics guru and contributes to our WNBA draft coverage at the Next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePick. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a free deposit match up to $100.
I'm good.
I'll throw it to M to explain the process of our board.
Yeah, so to just take listeners a little bit behind the scenes, this doesn't just happen by us throwing a bunch of names at the wall and saying, yeah, that looks like a good order, or it doesn't happen through us, trying to get different reports from around the industry just to put them all within the list of how they're going to get drafted. There are names on this list that we know are definitely going to get drafted well ahead of where we have them on our rankings. But for us, it's about coming together and taking some pretty extensive notes that we've compiled over the past few years and coming together and spending really an unreasonable amount of time late one night a week or two ago and just saying, okay, what are the grades that each of us would put on all these players? What does that translate to just in terms of trying to sort of average these things out? And then very loosely and very unscientifically doing tiebreakers between them, which I decided mostly for my own purposes was just going to be whatever the max grade on any player was going to be the tiebreaker. Sometimes that was convenient. Sometimes that wasn't. But what that results in is it results in a process where we have effectively the same grade on Asia Blackwell, kind of in the same way that we do have the same grade on Hannah Jump, almost the same grade as Rickea Jackson and Angel Reese and Kenesha Lockett. But what that translates to on the board is differences of 5 spots, maybe almost 10 in some places, and it means that things are a little exaggerated. So we tier things off to make things a little bit easier within that realm and assess them there. But again, this all comes down to what we're evaluating at. What that means is for us, it's really focused on not where a player's coming from just from their senior year. It's not focused on sort of where their ceiling is and just what their odds of becoming a future star are, unless we're just talking about players who we've determined are going to be in our grades, top half of the first rounders, in which case you really, in the W, you need to swing for possible stars. But it comes down, later in those rounds, we're really focused on looking at players' developmental arcs, seeing where they're coming from, where they're going to, and especially what skills are we looking at and saying these are the ones that are really going to make or break the difference between them hitting their floors and hitting their ceilings. I think a really great example of sort of that arc is with Aaliyah Edwards. Aaliyah Edwards was promising her freshman year. Her sophomore year, she basically fouled herself off the floor throughout the NCAA tournament, and also just was extraordinarily unimpactful, doing anything but screening throughout most of that season. And then last year, she was probably the most improved player in the country, but also kept getting better throughout the season at some of the soft skills. Hunter, you did a great job of identifying those, and I want to throw that to you later in just a minute. But what that says to us is, not only is she so polished, but she's actually getting better at a lot of the sort of raw skills and adding to her game that is hard for us to often see. And within the context of her age, that means there's a lot of promise there. And when you add to that, in terms of what we said with the polish, we can already look at her game and say, this is a thing that we can see fitting really well into a W role. And when you have that and you're expanding to that, it gives you a much higher floor and a much higher ceiling than someone like Angel Reese, where when we look at her game, we say, we easily see how she becomes, an all WNBA level player. There are so many defensive tools, there are so many defensive skills, and the offensive tools are there. She's a dominant driver. But the question is always, for us at least, and we've mentioned this before, what's the counter to the game? And where is she actively getting better? And it's hard to see those things for us at the moment. And, that's why we ask questions. We don't call them weaknesses on the board because we want to see things in the year. We're not locking things into stone. But it does mean that there's a lot of room for error. And Lincoln, I want to ask you, when we come to this board, like I said, these are consensus grades between us. We're not unanimous on these things. What do you think were the biggest players where, you, me, and Hunter really had the most difference from your grades?
Yeah, I think that I have a few differences from you guys. I'm a little bit higher on defensive playmaking sometimes, which that's just a result of all of our different pathways to getting to this point, how we watch basketball and what we value in players. So you're going to have these differences. So sometimes you'll have like a shot maker whose primary thing that they do is shot making and doesn't do much else. And when you compare that with a versatile defender who may not score as many points per game and may not have the same kind of offensive numbers, it's going to look a little strange. I still believe in ways that sometimes are hard to explain in some shot makers that have had their numbers fall off. Someone like Charisma Osborne, who plays really good defense, is a dynamic defender, a solid passer, and a good pick and roll player who just hasn't been able to find the jump shot for the last level to find a way. So she hasn't been able to find the shot outside of 16 or 17 feet for the last couple years. But I think that a lot of that can fall on shoulder injuries and kind of having to carry too much usage. And to me, there's still a very good WNBA player. And as just part of the process, we're going to have differences on players. I think that I'm still a little bit higher on Charisma Osborne than the two of you. She's a really, really good defender, which is not it's really fun. I was in a back hallway, so that's probably why the Wi-Fi was.
We're recording.
But,
Start your fucking spiel. We're recording.
Hello?
to take listeners behind the scenes of this podcast, if we keep the bit that I'm currently doing in the podcast, we have had to relocate Lincoln at least once right now.
That's not just me.
Nothing's disappeared.
What is happening? You've been
okay, we're not taking any listeners behind the scene. This
is not happening.
Okay.
It's going in.
Okay, hold on.
Yep,
I'm gonna do that bit again, but Lincoln's not gonna talk about ghosts. To take listeners behind the scenes of what is going on in this podcast, Lincoln is about to give you a spiel on how he's higher on Charisma Osborne than the rest of us for probably the third or fourth time. But unfortunately, his connection keeps dropping out in the middle of it, and he's had to relocate. And also somehow he just interrupted the last time I tried to do this bit by talking about ghosts. The magic of podcasts. Lincoln, would you like to provide our listeners yet another spiel on Charisma Osborne?
I'm high on Charisma Osborne. She is an incredible defender. She's a really good playmaker, especially out of pick and roll. The outside shot hasn't been there. I'm willing to chalk a lot of that up to the continued shoulder issues she's had, which is not something that most people would do. But I still think that she can be a really good WNBA player. Her point of attack defense is something that really intrigues me. And we're always going to have differences on players in our player evaluation parts because that's how basketball works, is that nobody sees it the same as someone else. So that's just something that's really interesting to me. And one of my favorite parts of this is trying to see the different perspectives on different players and just how we all watch basketball in different ways and how we evaluate in different ways and how that affects the final outcome of where we end up.
Hunter, who would you say is the player that you're the farthest from being looking on, either too high or too low? Well, not too high or too low, but either higher or lower.
I would say Maddie Westbeld is the one I have a pretty stark difference between where she's at on our consensus board versus where I'm at. I'm just someone that really values athleticism, positional value, and just athleticism in general is something I put a lot of emphasis on with my evaluation. Like last year, I was extremely high on Letitia Meir, Maya Hirsch. These are players that were a lot based on raw abilities versus what they're actually at right now. And that's why I'm high on Aaliyah Edwards as well. And I have a 60 grade on her just with the core strength, her lower body flexibility, and everything she can do as an athlete. I really value that. Even though she's slightly undersized at 6'3", I really value her technique and just how she operates at the center position. I think there's a lot of versatility. You put her at the 4, at the 5. You likely want someone next to her that's also got some more size to alleviate some of that pressure. But I think there's a lot of value in someone like her as well.
Yeah, to get into the Maddie Westbeld grade for just a quick second. When it came to pretty much everyone, honestly, after Celeste Taylor, there was pretty decent. I won't say wide. There was a decent range on where we were with some of these evaluations, just in terms of the rankings with respect to each other. Most of these grades and these rankings end up coming out pretty evenly with respect to where each of us were having them. But with some of them, one person's able to pull them sort of in one direction or another. And like I said, that wasn't common, but Charisma Osborne definitely jumped up a few spots because of Lincoln's grade on her. Maddie Westbeld was fully because of me. I had her, I think, one spot higher on my personal board than she ended up on our consensus. And I think Hunter, you had her as basically like a non-consideration, which is fair. You can see that in watching her, that there's if she was a step quicker, she'd be a first round prospect. And if she was a step slower, I don't think anyone would ever think about her even close to it. For me, it's always about, the rarity of the skill level at the position and how much value that brings. And for me, it's, if it's even possible to find a half step quicker with Maddie Westbeld, she's one of the most skilled 4s in pro ball. I think that's where I have that on that. But after the break, I will happily share the player that I pulled, especially far in our board.
PrizePick is the most fun I've had, winning up to 25 times my money this football season. You can just select two or more players, pick more or less on the projected stats, and place your entry. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes PrizePick the number one fantasy sports app. PrizePick offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePick discounts select players' values up to 25%. Provide even more value. PrizePick now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this football season. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA or use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, so let's get back into our discussion on our 2024 WNBA Draft preseason draft board. And I'll give it to you, Em, to kind of explain this for us.
Yeah. So I I think the player on my end that I pulled the farthest on our board one direction or the other, I think it's pretty straightforward in that for me was Diamond Johnson. I think it was possible Diamond Johnson might just be an honorable mention on our board, but I had a pretty solidly high. I had her 18th on my personal board, and that's given the fact that she had been injured for most of last year. She was sort of in what I think people could agree was not a role befitting her talent the year before at NC State when she was coming off the bench. I think we'll see what happens this year at Norfolk State, and it's very unfortunate that they play an interesting non-conference schedule, so they have some good opponents. We're definitely going to take a look at that, but I think just in terms of the skill set, she could jump it up even higher for me, just proving for the most part health, and she still has the ability to resolve freshman and sophomore and consistency against like top defenses. But for me, it was when she's been healthy last year, and she was healthy the year before in that year as well. There wasn't a lot that I saw from her that suggested that there just wasn't a lot of skill here and that there wasn't enough shot making and more than enough playmaking and enough at least like defensive capability to make up for the height. I was frankly surprised that as many people as I talked to, including you two, including a couple other scouts that we know, they weren't super high on Diamond Johnson. I was a little surprised. I think that she will probably prove some players wrong. Not some players. I think she'll prove some people wrong, and I'd be willing to put some solid money on that, frankly. And in terms of, I think what was farthest away from the success rate on, honestly, all these pretty much came close to what I had. Maddie Westfeld and Diamond Johnson were probably for me the high grades that I was higher on. I also might have been honestly the high grade on Carla Lippe from France. For me, it was she has shown so much skill and so much ability on both ends that like the questions for her are literally just, is there more room for buy-in here? And can she just do things more often that she's already doing? And for me, what I see those, we have very, very stark differences, the three of us, in terms of what we think are the most and least developable things. And for me, when I see those, I'm like, well, that's a lot easier to change in a player and in a prospect than something like completely adding a jump shot to someone who has not been able to have any sort of decent jump shot before. It's better than trying to get a player to have the hip flexibility and footwork to get over and under ball screens without losing their defensive assignment at the point of attack if they've clearly shown that they're not very good at that. And I think that comes out in some of the players, and especially in the differences in what we're trying to see with where these players we have ranked and where we think they're going to hit in some areas and where that's going to translate, and where for some other players that might be a poison pill. Hunter, we've worked on, at this point, basically 2.5 seasons worth of boards together. At this point, how did this class sort of, at least just coming into the season, how has this class, I think, sort of challenged you in terms of having to assess where players might be able to develop more than others? Where did this class show you different skill sets that that you might have had to go outside of your comfort zone and sort of put yourself in an interesting position trying to assess?
Yeah, there's a lot of guards in this class compared to last year. We're talking about different positions where, for me, it was really tough diving into all these guards and trying to decide what are the biggest differences between these players, because we're talking about similar skill sets with a lot of these players. And I think, like when we were going through our comps for our board, there's not a lot of guards in league history like the players in this class. There's not easy comps just because of how the WNBA is structured. It's a lot more big heavy. Where we're seeing with this class, we have a lot more guards than we do have bigs, and it's not even really close there. So I think for me, I was more so diving into the guards and trying to conceptualize what do they do good and what is the value in this draft, because there's a lot of players, and that's really different from last year where it was kind of easy for us to rank players because players dropped that were close. So for me, it was the guards.
Well, and another thing that separates this class from the last several classes is you have a depth at the very top of the class that you didn't really have the last few classes, where we have these three that have kind of separated themselves for us in Caitlin Clark, Paige Bueckers, and Cameron Brink, who have all shown incredible talent in their college career so far. And to have that depth at the very top of the class and also match that with like a dozen grades that are higher than that would have been like top 6 in last year's class for us is really fascinating to have the depth of talent in both the star area and among the role players that are projected role players in this class.
And to be clear, there are actually, I think, even fewer or sort of a lower concentration of players among this preseason board that we've done. A lower concentration of players who are in their 5th years, who are out of eligibility, than there were in last year's postseason board, or at least at the point in time that we were making it, before people really declared whether or not they were going to use that 5th year coming to the draft. So there's a lot of volatility in this board, and some names that I wouldn't say we necessarily expect to go one way or the other, but some names that, if we had to put guesses or educated bets on, I would say I think most of us expect Paige to go back to UConn, Cam probably to come out, Caitlin could be a very interesting leverage play in terms of where she wants to get her money from, and if a team she doesn't want to go to wins the lottery, maybe she almost publicly leverages her way to a more favorable team for herself the following year. I think someone like Aaliyah Edwards might go either way, but if we're looking at UConn's depth chart, it would make sense, given relationships there, for Nika Mule to come out this year. I think both Indiana guards probably go back to school. There's so much volatility here. Honestly, would it surprise either of you if we had 3 internationals in the first round just because of the ability for so many college players to pull out?
No, there's a real chance Layla Khan, who is our top international prospect, who we view as one of the best international prospects in recent memory, of being a top 3.
At least recent memory, for sure.
It's possible, but I want to go through our top 10 for the listeners. So at number 1, we do have Caitlin Clark. At number 2, we have Paige Bueckers. At number 3, Cameron Brink. At number 4, we have Aaliyah Edwards. At number 5, Layla Khan. Number 6, Maddie Shear. Number 7, Carlise Laker-Walker. Number 8, JC Sheldon. Number 9, Tahina Paopao. And then at number 10, we have Nadia Pouch. So that is where we go.
At 10, we have Georgia Amor.
Georgia Amor and Nadia Pouch. Right there.
Yes. Yeah, and Nadia Pouch is the last player of her tier. So just to clarify the tiers there, it's Caitlin Clark is. We are very confident that her median outcome is just your average perennial MVP candidate, which is to say, we think the odds of her being
average.
We think the odds of her being like an inner circle Hall of Famer are which I guess is the same thing. We think the odds of her being one of, if not like the couple greatest point guards of all time, are about the same odds of her winning maybe one MVP and just making a bunch of all W teams. Paige and Cameron Brink for us are both basically just a tier below that. That's players who we believe are going to be basically perennial all-WNBA players and challenge for at least 1 or 2 MVPs throughout their career. Behind that, Aaliyah Edwards and Layla Khan consistently plus starters on first division, playoff contender and real contender teams. Ken Pratt basically as good of odds as being all W players as they have of essentially being solid bench players for their career. A grade below that, so basically just we think average starters, about the same odds of being end of the bench players as all-stars. That's Maddie Shear, Jessica Walker, Jace Sheldon, Tina Paopao, Georgia Amor, and Nadia Pouch, just to break it down by tiers. And I think, in terms of that, the difference between, for us, Maddie Shear and Nadia Pouch, again, that's a difference of, like I said at the top, that's a 6 or 7 spot difference. compared to, there is one spot between Maddie Shear and Lily Khan. But for us, there's a 2 grade difference there. That's pretty significant. That's a difference again between I actually have this written down. Sorry for what is terrible podcasting at the moment. But that's essentially the difference between about a full win above replacement level per season. And that's important. That's really important. Spread across the entire starting lineup, that's a 5-win difference. So, again, a 1-spot difference in the board can mean a lot more than a 6-7 spot difference in the board. And that's, I think, the most important part. Coming up after the break, we're excited to continue diving into the board, talk about how difficult it was to come up with some of these comps.
Right now, customers get $150 in bonus bets with a winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get into the action. The app is easy to use. There are a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. All right, so this isn't our historical scouts, but we're going to get into some more comps for these prospects. The comp section is tough because, like I said earlier, with some players, there's not a lot of good comps. Like trying to come up with floor comps for a player we view as an MVP median outcome is really tough. Same with coming up with comps for just some of these guards and some of these players that we view as really unique skill sets to what we see in the women's side, which is more common on the men's side. These are just skill sets that are just different.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to go off of that from before, because what you mentioned in terms of having trouble with that is something that I think, as we went along in this, really drove home what this class means for the W. And, quote unquote, this class, because for the most part, when we're talking about this, when we say this class, we're talking about players who are at least seniors this year. If you're listening to this podcast, I don't know why you would be. I'm sorry for whatever led you here. But if you're listening to this podcast a year, 2 years down the line, we're referring to essentially the players that make up this class and next year's class, depending on which draft they declare for. And I think it really gets into when we're looking at, trying to come up with floor and ceiling comps for Charlize Sledger-Walker, when we're trying to come up with really any W comps for N.D. Rogers, when we're trying to figure this out for a Celeste Taylor and a Georgia Amore. These are players, looking at specifically some of these guards, Hunter, like you're saying, I had the most trouble doing this with the guards we really see as sort of like pick and roll players. So like Charlize Sledger-Walker, for example. We have her ceiling. There's a little preview for several months from now when the postseason board comes out, and you get floors and ceilings there too. But we have her ceiling as Kyle Lowry, and that sort of makes sense. We have her as a combo guard, but we also have her as a primary ball handler, and that's kind of a weird mix. As someone who you kind of want to be the primary feature of the offense, but also isn't like a true full half-court playmaker that can kind of do a lot of stuff on and off the ball. Again, we're talking about someone very similar kind of to Kyle Lowry in terms of the upside there. But it's really weird trying to look at WNBA history and say, where are the players who are sort of that kind of mix of talent? Where are those players that you, with India Rogers or Celeste Taylor or JC Sheldon, that you really think of as pick and roll players, but not as the focal point of your offense? It's easy with Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers, because we can say, oh yeah, that's Diane Taurasi, that's Becky Hammond, that's Chelsea Gray, that's Coop. When you get into the lower, when you get into, okay, where's your second best guard who's running a bunch of pick and rolls? Where's your guard coming off the bench? Your Lou Williams, who's going to do that? There's not a lot of depth there. Honestly, the only player I kept, like of the players we came to, we got like a short Ryan Howard for one of these counts. We got Malika Hodges, who pretty much never ran pick and rolls anyway. I kept coming back to trying to figure out like if any of these players could be Alex Bentley. That's the only guard I had in mind there, but she's also a great defender and also never got to the rim. So we're talking about a very limited skill set. And Hunter, Lincoln, I know you guys have both been attuned to this conversation. We've been saying for years between each other, and I think the wider WNBA and college basketball watching audience has been pretty aware that this is a class that is going to redefine the WNBA. And I think that's probably one of the things I'm most excited about. I guess if you guys, if either of you have seen anything from this class that has reinforced that and maybe made you question that, is that something that's come up in the scouts and in the board?
It's interesting. It is an influx of talent at the guard position in a way that we haven't really seen before. A lot of the greatest prospects that we've done this whole series going back to 1998, all the way to the beginning of the WNBA in 1997, where we talked through all these great prospects, and none of them are guards except for that 3-year stretch between 2001 and 2004, and to have this group of guards led by Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers is something that we've never really seen in a draft class in the WNBA before. It's fascinating to see how the league is changing and how the game of basketball is changing.
Hunter, you've been talking to some people around the industry, starting to connect with some front office staff, especially player development folks. Do you think, because this is probably my biggest concern, and this is why, one of the biggest reasons why we often have disconnects between our draft boards and our grades and where players actually end up getting drafted. Do you think that the league has the capability in terms of both roster space, in terms of imagination of coaching and management staff, and in terms of player development infrastructure to actually be able to really take advantage of this sudden influx of guard talent?
Yeah, that's a tough thing, but I think what we saw last year was, I can say some of the guards we saw running offenses, backup units last year, I think some of these players are going to be better than them in like 2-3 years. So I think we're probably going to see some of these guards going back. I say maybe half of them go back. So I think there might be enough roster spots. Then we're talking about expansion, so we're going to have roster spots for those guards as well. So I don't know. It's a hard conversation because there's so many guards, and guards just really need reps, more pick and roll reps. It's just vital to have roster spots for them to play. So I hope there is enough roster spots. So it'd be tough for some of these players to get.
I mean, especially when we're talking about, as you're just saying, how hard it is with the volume of great, like really good, capable pick and roll guards in this game or in this class. The biggest thing is, as a pick and roll lead guard, you are the one who's doing most of the processing on the offensive end for the whole team. You got to be able to get up WNBA speed. And I think, we've seen throughout the historical series that there are players who, when they clearly demonstrate like excellent content processing skills, they are so far ahead of the curve and they adjust so quickly. But there are a lot of raw players who, have that ability to maybe take a minute to get up to WNBA speed. And like you're saying, I just hope that there's reps to make that adjustment. To kind of close us out, I just want to ask each of you, Lincoln, you can start if you want. Who are a couple names on this list that you are most looking forward to this year, either to answer a question you have or just to be able to see play again for at least one more year?
2 names, I'll just stick to 2 right now. Sarah Andrews and Jewel Spear. Both of them are incredible shot makers. They can pass the ball, shoot the ball. Jewel Spear a little bit more of a shot maker. She's been an incredible shot maker, running the offense basically by herself at Wake Forest for the last couple of years, and now putting her in an offensive system at Tennessee, surrounded by a lot more talent, with a whole lot of shot making on that roster, with Rickea Jackson, with other players like Jillian Hollingshead and Tamari Key to beat what would have been her best teammates at Wake Forest. It's a whole lot of talent around her that I'm really interested to see. And Sarah Andrews is going to be in probably a little bit more ball dominant role. She's one of my favorite players to watch. She's such an athlete. She's such an interesting pick and roll player. And those are two players that I'm really excited to watch from this class.
Baylor overall, I'm very excited to watch just because they have so much talent. They have so little height, but so much length. They have so many guards.
Yeah, for me, first, I'm really excited to watch JC Sheldon. She had a lower leg injury, and her stats really fell off last year. And this is someone we were really high on last year in last year's class.
Yeah, she was a player. So, sorry to interrupt, but we got a couple very positive reports on her that I think if she had not had that injury and if she had decided to declare, I think it's very hard to see that she would have made it out of the top half of last year's first round.
Right. And then the other two prospects for me is players that aren't on our board but are honorable mentions. I'm excited to watch Sydney Taylor and Kiki Jefferson. These are two players that didn't play many games against high major talents last year. So just really answering the question of what kind of prospect are they and are they a prospect? So I threw them on our honorable mention list. I had to do some convincing, but they're on our honorable mention list because I think there's unique skills. Kiki Jefferson, there's shot making, there's some good athleticism, there's some good positional passing. With Sydney Taylor, you have the shot making, the shooting range, one of the best deep shooters in college basketball at 5'9".
Yeah, and that's the most.
Those are some prospects.
Yeah, that's the most fun thing for me about the board, honestly, is just when we get together and I don't think it's ever arguing, but it's trying to convince each other of where to put someone, of where to move the grades. We had a lot of that trying to find consensus grades for the board that we came out with who were the best players across any class at the end of last April. But yeah, I mean, you convincing us to put on Kiki Jefferson and Sydney Taylor, me trying to get Diamond Johnson on. I think those are the things that are the most fun because it's like where we're so different in our reports. And it's really something that, when it comes out on the public side, we're putting all our names behind it. But privately, it's a chance for us to sort of like remember the names that everyone's sort of, that's the player that is on their beat. And that is who, come 6-8 months down the line, we can either have a mea culpa or make fun of them for.
Right. Thanks for making Ultimates Basketball your first listen every day. Join me next week for continued coverage of women's college basketball. The season's almost here. We're almost here. Quick off season. We just have the WNBA season end, but we're back. And we'll be getting to a lot of draft conversation on Saturdays after we conclude our historical scouting series. We're going to dive into our top prospects of all time list, similar to this board, but ranking the best prospects in WNBA history. Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.